Hey, welcome back to Leavetherest. Today's topic, along with most of the topics I cover, have normally something to do with something I feel like I'm convicted of in my own life, right? It's something that I personally feel like I'm struggling with, or something that I feel like the Lord's kind of revealed to me as something that I tend to make a mistake in. This topic has to do with self-justification, or kind of making excuses, and kind of the problem with that, and even the danger with that. And so I've kind of broken it down into different sections. And the first one is, how does it start? So how do we end up in a situation where we're trying to justify ourselves or make an excuse? Well, I think it starts with a problem. Not so much a problem outside of us as much as a problem within us. Something's happened in which we've done something where we've fallen short. We've realized that there is a deficiency or a failure in our response, in our actions, in our thoughts, in something we've done. And I think our first response many times is to excuse it. It's to justify it, right? It's to find some way to say, I know I did this, but this is why. The only reason I failed at this was because this happened. And so we want to start giving the reasons or the excuses. But why do we do it? You know, I think the reason that we struggle with wanting to justify ourselves and make excuses so often is because it makes us feel better. It makes us feel like maybe we're not as much of a failure, or maybe we didn't really mess up, or maybe it really is somebody else's fault, or maybe it really was out of our hands or out of our power, and so we're not really responsible. I think that is why we struggle with the desire to make excuses. But I don't think that makes it right. I don't think that makes it right at all. In fact, I think we can see kind of the first example of an excuse or a self-justification in the case of Adam and Eve. You know, if we look back to the original sin where God said, you know, of all the trees in the garden, do not eat from this tree. And what do Adam and Eve do? They eat from that tree, right? And what is God's response? First, he goes to Eve and he says, what have you done? Have you eaten from the tree which I commanded you not to eat from? And she responds not by saying yes. Her first words are, it was the serpent you placed in the garden who deceived me. So immediately she's shifting blame. She's saying, well, it's not really me. It was the serpent. And she's almost even saying it's partially your fault, God, because you placed the serpent here. So I'm not really responsible. I was tricked. Right? And so instead of Eve taking responsibility, she shifts the blame. And then God goes to Adam, and it's kind of almost funny that Adam does the exact same thing, but he shifts the blame over to Eve. He says, it's the woman. The woman you gave me, the woman you put here has tricked me, has deceived me into eating the fruit, so it's not really my fault. So I think we even see the first case example in the first humans to ever exist, which is kind of funny. And I think a good thing to start asking ourselves is, what do we blame, or who do we blame? You know, I think we want to excuse a lot of things. Do we blame our financial situation? Do we blame some other person? Do we blame the situation we find ourselves in? Do we blame our physical health or heredity? And I think some illustrations of this could even be, so I cheated on my taxes, right? And I'm not talking personally, but I'm saying for a person, maybe they cheated on their taxes, but the way they're justifying that is they're saying, well, the government cheats me out of money every day. So what's it going to hurt if I get a little bit of my money back, right? It's not really that bad. So now I've taken something and I've justified it, right? Or, excuse me, maybe it's, maybe it's a situation where I have not kept up with my hours totally honestly at work, right? So I've said I worked a little more than I actually did. And the way I justify that is by saying, well, I didn't get paid for this amount of time I worked the other day, or they're not paying me as much as they should. So in all reality, it makes it okay. We're kind of breaking even now. I'm not really doing anything wrong. I'm kind of making it where it should be. So what I've been able to do in those two situations, and there's a million others we could talk about, is I've taken something that is obviously wrong, something that I probably felt convicted of or guilty of, and then I made an excuse in order to make myself feel better. The scary thing is oftentimes it does make me feel better. And I'm going to talk about why that is here in just a second. But at the end of the day, we can't control what happens to us. I have no control over what somebody else does to me, what somebody else says to me, what situation may come up or occur. But I can control my response. And I think one of the things that we struggle with sometimes is we feel like, well, this thing happened to me, or this person did this to me. My husband yelled at me. That was the only reason I responded to him in such an angry way. We can't stop people or things or situations from happening to us, but we are responsible for the way we respond. There is no one who is accountable or to blame except for Caleb in regards to what I do after something happens. And so we have to be careful not to fall into that thought process where it's really, I'm only reacting to what someone else did. I think, unfortunately, many of us don't really want to change this. And I think the reason is obvious, because if I change, if I no longer make excuses, if I no longer justify myself, that means I have to take responsibility. I have to say, you know what? Even though you did this, or maybe although this situation happened, at the end of the day, it's my fault. I shouldn't have done that. It doesn't justify it. It doesn't make it okay. I think that's the reason we don't want to acknowledge that fact. We want to make excuses. We want to justify ourselves. Because if we don't, we have to accept blame. And accepting blame and repenting takes a lot of humility. And humility is a tough thing for many of us to learn. Unfortunately, I think we live in a society that really creates this sense that people are never at fault. It really pushes this idea where I'm never at fault. There's always something I can dish it off on. There's always some way to blame something else. I think our society, unfortunately, really leads us to feel like victims all the time. And I can even say personally, sometimes I easily fall into that mindset of feeling like a victim. I feel like people or situations are always happening to me, and so as a victim, I'm not at fault for what happens. And the scary and dangerous thing about feeling like a victim is that I think it leads us to a paralysis. It leads me to a stagnant place where I don't change. And the reason is simple, because if we think about it, if I feel like a victim, then I feel like something has happened to me. Therefore, I have done nothing wrong as a victim, right? And if I've done nothing wrong, then there's nothing to change. Nothing would need to change if I was truly a victim. And so that's the scary thing about feeling like a victim, is that if I really feel like a victim, then I'm not going to be motivated to change any of those things that I may be doing wrong or incorrect. Maybe there's been somebody you've known that you've talked to, and they've done something very apparently wrong, but they can talk to you in total honesty and total truth, defending themselves, feeling like they've done nothing wrong, and you're almost floored by it. You're like, what are you talking about? And I think part of that is that person's probably slipped into this mindset where they feel like a victim. And when we feel like that, like I said, it leads to this paralysis or this stagnation where there's no reason to change because I haven't done anything wrong. So I think we have to really be careful of that and really guard against that from happening. I think the wonderful truth of being able to admit that we've fallen, that we failed, that we fell short. The wonderful truth in that is that it allows me to do the opposite of paralysis or the opposite of being stagnant. It allows me to begin to change. Many times the only time that we can really repent is if we feel like we've sinned or we've fallen short, right? And so the great thing about really realizing that, hey, I've messed up and I can admit that, and I'm not making excuses and I'm not trying to justify myself, is that it allows me to make the changes that really need to happen. And so I think one of the greatest things that we can begin to do to counter, this feeling of self-justification or this excuse making is, one, to really, and most probably importantly, just to begin to pray that God would convict us of the things that we're doing wrong. And He would convict us of the excuses we've made. And He would convict us of the self-justification in our lives. And He would really lead us to have to face our sin and our failures head on and to take full responsibility for it. And then from there to begin to repent of those things. Because even the word repent means to turn. to do different, right? And so I'm admitting that I need to change, and that allows me to begin to make those changes. And it steers me away from that self-justification and that excuse making that always wants to pin the blame on someone or something else. So I would encourage you, pray that prayer, seek after the Lord, and stay away from the desire to make excuses and to blame others or to justify yourself. So I hope this video has been encouraging. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more.